A remarkable and historic event happened high above the Mohave Desert this morning. A privately funded manned vehicle made it into space for the first time ever. This could be the first step for space tourism.
And of course, who was the only Las Vegas reporter live at the scene? Our own George Knapp. George, what happened there this morning?
Gary and Paul, I'll tell you, a lot of talk about space tourism. You know, the idea of a luxury hotel in space may sound like futuristic fiction, but based on what happened here today in Mohave, it's not as far-fetched as it was just yesterday. You know, the idea of space tourism is one that should greatly interest Southern Nevadans because, you know, with all of our collective tourism expertise, we could take the world where no tourists have gone before. When the sun rose over Mohave Monday morning, it was the dawn of a new day in more ways than one. Spaceship One, funded by billionaire Paul Allen, designed by aviation whiz Burt Rutan, was carried into the sky early Monday morning by this exotic plane. At 50,000 feet, its rocket kicked in and it hurtled almost straight up. Minutes later, it slipped past the Earth's atmosphere, 62 miles above the surface, and pilot Mike Melville became astronaut Mike Melville. Back on Earth, Melville was cheered as a hero, Rutan hailed as a genius. But what does this really mean? Some skeptics regard it as a mere stunt that has no real benefit or practical use. Rutan and others believe, for one thing, that this flight represents the beginning of a space tourism industry. A larger version of Spaceship One could become sort of a space airline to carry tourists up to the edge of the world. Las Vegan John Alexander, a friend of Rutan's, says hordes of tourists would pay plenty.
If we can make space accessible at a reasonable cost, estimates are that there are many people who are backed up at $100,000 for a space adventure, for instance.
In such a scenario, the Nevada test site might win big. The test site is already considered a front runner to become a primary spaceport if and when such travel becomes a reality. That could mean jobs, development, and technology for Nevada. Also watching closely is Bigelow Aerospace. The company's North Las Vegas plant is producing inflatable space habitats that could be turned into space hotels. The company's owner already runs a string of hotels on Earth and is known to be close to Rutan, who talked about the possibilities.
For suborbital space tourism, you have got to give everyone a large window, and you got to get his face close to it, and you got to give him a lot of room. And I particularly feel that 100 kilometers is not good. You've got to go to 150 to give them time to unstrap and float around. So you have to give them the experience in the spaceship that does not have a destination.
Burt Rutan also talked at length today about luxury hotels in space. He thinks they will work. He thinks there are enough people out there who will pay big money for the experience to make it a legitimate and a profitable business. Of course, there are a lot of other things can take place in space as well that could be profitable. For example, pure research, pharmaceutical research, research into new kinds of materials. All of those things, though, will only work if private enterprise has its own presence way up there. And based on what happened here today, it really could happen. Reporting live from Mohave, California, George Knapp, Channel 8 Eyewitness News.
George, what makes the test site a leading candidate to become a spaceport?
A couple of things come immediately to mind. One thing is that it's already government land, so it's already controlled airspace. But the big advantage it has, even over a place like Mohave, which now is a spaceport in its own right, is its altitude. It's about a half a mile higher, and that may not sound like much when you're going way up there, but it really does make a difference in the cost of a launch and the cost of a mission.
Interesting, George. Thank you.
Sure.